Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things and welcome to another video and welcome to my June wrap-up. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the month of June. So I had a really good reading month in June, read some very fantastic things, which was great. So yes, let me get into the books. Before I do, I will do a quick goals check-in, which I have been doing at the start of every monthly wrap-up this year, which was very satisfying for the first 4 months of the year when I was smashing my goals, and has been a less fun thing to do in the last two wrap-ups when I have been failing at my goals, which is fine, you know. There's still 6 months of the year left to conquer my long-term physical TBR. It's fine. So one of my big goals for this year is to finish reading the novels of Anthony Trollope. I did indeed read an Anthony Trollope novel in June, but unfortunately I didn't read more than one, and I was hoping to. I have two Anthony Trollope books out from the library that I was kind of hoping I would read at least one of in June, and I just didn't, but that's fine. Not going to read them in July because of Jane Austen July, but hopefully I will read them in August. My library has quite a few obscure Anthony Trollope novels that don't get taken out very much, so I think probably I'll be able to just keep reserving them and I'll read them after Jane Austen July. But yes, I did read one book by Anthony Trollope this month, which is, you know, more than I read of my long-term TBR books this month. There are 19 books that have been on my TBR for sort of the longest time, I guess like over 2 or 3 years. I can't remember what the cutoff point was when I made this list, but I have been trying to read like 2 a month, and I did that really well for the first few months of the year, and then I didn't read any in May or June just because there have been so many other books that I wanted to read. So that's fine. I will read more later in the year, but I didn't read any of my long-term TBR books in June. However, I did have more success with my other sort of main goal of the year, which is to read more internationally and read more in translation. So I read from 5 countries in June: the UK, the US, Canada, Iceland and Japan, and I read 3 books in translation. So let me start off, as I often do, with some classics. And I will start off, in fact, with not one, but 2 books by Thomas Hardy. From this point onwards, Thomas Hardy is going to slightly and accidentally take over my reading year because Jen the Librarian is hosting a Thomas Hardy read-along, reading all of his works in publication order, 1 a month. So I read June's book, Desperate Remedies, and then I also read July's book, Under the Greenwood Tree, because I thought, you know, I don't necessarily want to read it in Jane Austen July, and it's very short. I'll just squeeze it in at the end of the month. And I listened to both of these on audiobook, which I really enjoyed, and I'm hoping that I will continue to read along with the rest of the read along on audiobook. There might be some of the obscure Thomas Hardy books that don't have audiobooks, but I'm hoping I can find one. I'll see how I go. And I do love Thomas Hardy, and I kind of felt like I just really wanted to take this opportunity to reread all of Thomas Hardy, but I do feel like that will slightly get in the way of some of my other planned Victorian reading for this year, but that's fine. I do love Thomas Hardy, and there's quite a few of his books I've only read once that it's exciting and fun to reread. Anyway, Desperate Remedies is Thomas Hardy's first novel from 1871, and I really, really like this one. It's actually like ranks quite highly for me in terms of Thomas Hardy. It is a sensation novel, which is not what Thomas Hardy wrote very much of later on in his career, and it is quite wild in many ways. It's full of scandal and secrets and mystery, and, you know, love triangles / quartets, as you do often find in all Hardy books. And basically it follows the tale of a young woman called Cytherea, who after her father's death has to kind of try and make her way in the world. So she ends up taking a position as a lady's maid for a woman who seems to have a mysterious past, and whose mysterious past may have some connection with Cytherea's own family, and everything goes on from there. I really love Desperate Remedies. It's really interesting chatting to other people about it in the Discord server. Like, it is quite a melodramatic book in some ways, which I think not everyone loves. But like, personally, I just really enjoy all the drama. And although it is a melodramatic book, I also feel like there are moments of real like emotional stakes and real like emotional poignancy. And I do find the characterization and kind of the twists and turns of the plot really great. I really like Desperate Remedies. I would really recommend it. I think it's really worth your time. And I think, as in terms of like Thomas Hardy's lesser known works, I think it is one of the most worth your time, if that makes sense. And then the other Thomas Hardy book I read was Under the Greenwood Tree, which in my opinion is much less worth your time. It actually gets read a lot more than Desperate Remedies, I think partly because it's a very short book, so a lot of people pick it up as like thinking it's a good place to start with Thomas Hardy, but I really don't recommend Under the Greenwood Tree unless you are a Hardy completionist. It is quite short. I think the audiobook was only like 5 or 6 hours, but it is quite a slow book. Not much happens. There isn't much plot. Sorry, Thomas Hardy. It's just, yeah, Under the Greenwood Tree is definitely one of my least favourite Thomas Hardy books. And I think actually on a reread, I kind of liked it even less. Because I just don't think there's that much about it that it's exciting. There are a few interesting moments, and I think especially towards the end, there's like one or two things that I find really interesting, but for the most part, it's quite a slow story. So there are a few things going on in Under the Greenwood Tree. We have a small town and its church choir and a new vicar who wants to bring in organ music instead of the church choir. And then we also have the local schoolmistress, Fancy Day, who is torn between various different suitors. I do think Fancy's quite an interesting character, but I just feel like there isn't quite enough in the rest of the book to really make me love it. And I think especially actually reading it like back to back with Desperate Remedies, I was just thinking to myself, Desperate Remedies is so much more exciting and interesting than Under the Greenwood Tree. I also kind of think that while Under the Greenwood Tree has some interesting things in terms of like its setting and its community, I feel like The Woodlanders has a relatively similar setting in some ways and is so much more interesting. And I was thinking actually even some of the like stuff about Fancy as a character and about her like social position and stuff. I feel like The Woodlanders has a similar setting and quite similar themes to Under the Greenwood Tree, but is so much better. Like The Woodlanders would rate very, very, very highly for me amongst Hardy's novels, and so I feel like my advice would be don't read Under the Greenwood Tree, read The Woodlanders. Unless you are a Thomas Hardy completionist, in which case do you read Under the Greenwood Tree? It's quite fun, but like, yeah, it's not his best. The other work of Victorian literature I read in June was The Golden Lion of Grandpere by Anthony Trollope, which I really, really enjoyed. Every time I read a book by Anthony Trollope, I do just kind of think to myself, why aren't I constantly reading Anthony Trollope? Because I love his books so much. And I want to be constantly reading them, but other books always get in the way. Anyway, The Golden Lion of Grandpere tells the story of this family at this inn in Alsace, so in France, but near the borders of Switzerland and Germany. And we're following this innkeeper and his son from his first marriage and his second wife's niece. So these two young people, there was maybe a bit of a flirtation going on between them, and the father wasn't happy about a flirtation going on under his roof. And he spoke to his son about this. His son therefore left the inn and has gone to work elsewhere. And while he's away, the father kind of wants his niece by marriage to marry this other potential suitor. And so we have a bit of a love triangle and various other things going on. And there's a lot that I really like about The Golden Lion of Grandpere. I love the way it's written. I thought the characterization was really interesting and the sort of character relationships were really interesting. One thing I always love about Anthony Trollope is sort of the complicated psychology and the realistic behaviour of his characters. Like, I always think people just behave in a very human way in Anthony Trollope, which, you know, is great. And I really like it. It was interesting reading it. It kind of put me in mind of two other shorter focus books by Anthony Trollope, Nina Balakar and Linda Tressel. These three books are all pretty short and focused, and they're all set in continental Europe rather than in Britain, and they all look at a determined young woman who is being pressured to take an action in relation to marriage by her family that she doesn't want to take. And I would say that The Golden Lion of Grandpere is probably like the least dark of the three, but I feel like those three books all have quite similar themes and are quite like interesting to look at together. And Nina Balaklar and Linda Tressel like have previously been published in one volume by Oxford World Classics, I think, ages ago. So they kind of are often put together, but I don't usually see The Golden Lion of Grandpere put with them. But I actually feel like they do go quite well together. So yeah. Anyway, I really enjoyed that. I always love Anthony Trollope whenever I read something by him. Another book I read in June was The Well of Loneliness by Radcliffe Hall. I didn't actually read this physical edition. I listened to it on audiobook. And I think it tells you how much I love this book that the moment I finished listening to it, I went and ordered myself a physical copy because I wanted to own a physical copy. I love this book so much. This is probably my favourite book of the year so far. No, I think it definitely is my favourite book of the year so far. It's Glorious Exploits. They can fight it out. This is my favourite classic of the year so far. And my favourite classic I've read in the last, like, 5 years, maybe? Like, loved it so much. I thought it was incredible and fascinating, and I will be thinking about it a lot. I need to make an individual book review of it, which I am going to do. Like, I'll probably film it in the next few weeks, but I probably won't put it up till August after Jane Austen July is done. But I found this such a fascinating, incredible, complex, powerful read. So The Well of Loneliness is a novel from 1928 about a woman called Stephen, and it is a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story. So we follow Stephen from her birth up until she's in her 30s, I guess. Before Stephen's birth, her parents are kind of expecting that they're going to have a boy, and they have been calling their baby in their head Stephen. So when she's born, they call her Stephen anyway. And throughout her childhood, Stephen feels sort of uncomfortable in her skin, I suppose, and aware that she is not necessarily like other people around her. And as she grows into her teenage years and her adulthood, she begins to realise that she is attracted to other women. And we follow her coming of age story, her coming to understand herself, her relationships with other women, her work as a writer, her work as an ambulance driver during the First World War, and so much more. And I just thought this book was incredible. Like, as a character study and a kind of psychologically complex novel, it is amazing. But also the themes within it are just fascinating. And it's such a fascinating novel, both in terms of the history of sexuality, but also in terms of the history of gender. And it is such a kind of important, fascinating queer classic. It was banned at the time, I believe, which I'm not hugely surprised by, considering how outright it discusses relationships between women, and how much of a cry for acceptance it is. It's interesting, I had put off reading The Well of Loneliness for a really long time because I knew that it was a really sad novel, and I had heard a lot of people say that it was a really sad novel. And so I was sort of really wanting to read it because I'm really interested in queer history and in queer literary classics. But I was wary of reading it because I thought it might be so depressing. But the thing I loved about The Well of Loneliness is that it's not like wallowing sad. It's angry sad. Like, this book is furious that the world treats Stephen as it does. And the book is like outraged that Stephen is not accepted by the world. And that's fascinating and fantastic. And is really, really powerful. I had also heard a lot of things about the ending, and I'm not going to have spoilers here. I will, as I said, make a separate video, and I'll probably have a spoilery section there. But I feel like the ending wasn't as despairing as I thought it would be. So that is something to know, maybe, if you have also been wanting to read this book but have been putting it off because you're concerned about the misery levels. Like I said, this is a sad book in many ways, and it's called The Well of Loneliness, and loneliness is definitely something that is explored a lot in this book. But I also think it is a book that is angry more than sad, and that was great. This was one of those books where I was listening to the audiobook, and every now and then I just have to pause to think about how great it was. I do a lot of audiobook listening while exercising, at the gym, and there were so many points where it was quite hard to not cry at the gym. So anyway, I have lots of thoughts about this. I should make an individual review because I feel like I just want to say so much about this book, but it was so good. It was so good. Then I read two 20th century Japanese books, one of which was Beast in the Shadows by Edagaro Rampo, translated from the Japanese by Ian Hughes. So this is a book also from 1928, I believe, very short, crime mystery classic. So this is a really interesting novel about a detective writer who finds himself involved in a mystery when a woman comes to him because she has been receiving threatening letters from another detective writer. So it's quite a meta book in some ways, and it kind of plays with the detective writer as a literary figure, I suppose. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really fun, and I thought the twists and turns of the plot were really interesting. I did kind of foresee some of them, but I didn't really mind that because I still thought it worked quite well. So yeah, I enjoyed this a lot, would recommend it, very short read. And then the other very short, very fun Japanese book that I read in June was Kikis Delivery Service by Aiko Kodono, translated by Emily Ballisteri. So this is a children's classic, I suppose, children's modern classic from 1985. And I really, really enjoyed this. I've been meaning to read this for years because I love the Studio Ghibli film Kikis Delivery Service. And I finally got round to it this month because it was one of the picks for Page Turners with Catchers Reading the Globe challenge. I'll leave her channel link down below. And I just really enjoy Kiki's Delivery Service. It's such a delight. It's a very episodic story about a 12-year-old witch who has to travel from her parents' home to a new town in order to establish herself and build a career for herself. And it's just very sweet and very fun, and a nice little coming-of-age story. It is very episodic. Like, I think the film Kiki's Delivery Service is a good adaptation of the book in the sense that it takes a lot of moments from the book, but it also kind of adds a little more of a overarching plot. There are a few more recurring characters. I was kind of expecting the book to be even more different from the film, I think, because I have read Howl's Moving Castle and seen the Studio Ghibli films Howl's Moving Castle, and they are quite separate. But I think Kiki's Delivery Service is a much more faithful film adaptation than Howl's Moving Castle. Sticking with translated fiction, but moving on to the 21st century, I also read this month The Blue Fox by Sijun, translated from the Icelandic by Victoria Cribbs. And I have no idea what I think about this book. So this was my book club pick for the historical fiction book club that I run over on Patreon. And I'm really glad that I read this with a book club because it was really interesting chatting about this book on Discord and everyone's different theories and interpretations and opinions on this book, because it's a very obscure, strange book with a lot that is open to interpretation and with some quite weird moments. I still don't know if I liked this book. I think I probably didn't like it that much. I think it was a middling read for me. It was definitely way too literary for me, way too ambiguous, way too open to interpretation, way too strange. And I kind of just wanted more from it, more detail, more story, more time with the characters. It's a book that is quite fragmented. So it's all told in very, very short chapters. And we kind of begin the story with a hunter who is in Iceland in the late 19th century hunting a blue fox. And then we kind of follow a few other different characters and we kind of get to learn at the end how these people are connected. And I felt like it was a bit too disparate and fragmented for me. There were some really interesting things about it. And like I said, I'm really glad I read it with a book club because there was a lot to discuss about it and a lot of interesting things to think about why the author had chosen to write this book in the way he did. I don't know how I feel about this. I'm glad that I read it. I'm glad I read it with a book club and that we had interesting discussions about it, but I don't know that I liked the book. But yeah, one book I read right back at the beginning of June was A Sign of Her Own by Sarah Marsh. I feel like I read this ages ago. I guess in a way I did. It's been a long month, but anyway, I did a full review of this along with a review of The Safekeep by Yael van der Woden that I read in May. So I'll leave that review video linked down below. This was one of the books I read because it was on the long list for the Walter Scott Prize for historical fiction, and I really, really loved this. I thought it was fantastic. So this is a story of Evelyn Lark, a young deaf woman, and it is a coming-of-age story, a Bildungsroman in some ways, set in 19th century Britain and the US, and we're following Ellen's coming-of-age story and her experiences as a deaf woman at this point in time, and especially her experiences having lessons from Alexander Graham Bell, the real historical figure, in a technique called visible speech, which was a technique of notating basically mouth movements in order to teach deaf people to speak more like hearing people. And kind of involved in these lessons is also lots of lip reading, and there's kind of a big tension in the book between people who believe that this is the best way for deaf people to communicate and people who believe that sign language is the best way for deaf people to communicate. And the kind of stigma around sign language at this point in the 19th century is really, really interestingly explored. And there's so much that I loved about this book. I thought the characterization throughout was absolutely fantastic. The writing is really, really lovely, so readable, so beautiful, but also so accessible beautiful, like just the kind of writing I love best. But also the themes of the book are fascinating, and the way that it looks at like communication, and how, you know, communication is the important thing, not your method of communication. I just thought that was wonderful, and I loved so much about this. So this was fantastic, would really, really recommend. Another work of historical fiction I read in June was The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. Did actually sneakily finish this in the first few days of July, but hey, I will include it in my June wrap-up anyway, as it's not Jane Austen July related. This is a sort of historical crime mystery novel that was massive sort of, I guess, 7 years ago. It won the Costa Book Prize in 2018, and I've been meaning to read it for a very long time and finally picked it up. I did find it like a fascinating read and very, very gripping as well. So this is a quite weird murder mystery. The beginning of the book, a narrator wakes up and he can't remember anything at all. He's lost all his memories. He has some kind of amnesia, but he's in this big house. He's staying here. There's obviously this big sort of house party going on, and there's definitely something dark going on in this house. And then at the end of that day, he goes to sleep and he wakes up the next day, and it's the same day, but he's woken up in someone else's body. So it is a time loop novel, but as well as there being a time loop, the narrator is jumping between different characters. So all of his like selves are existing at the same time. And every day that he wakes up in a new body, he gains more information about what is going on in this house, and more detail to help him solve and potentially stop the murder that it happens every single evening. So this is a fascinating book in many ways. The structure of it is obviously really, really fascinating and fun. I do love a time loop book. And I think the mystery itself is really interesting and works quite well. There's a lot of like interesting things to piece together, and it's quite fun like seeing things from lots of different directions. I did keep thinking as I was reading this book, like what an absolute nightmare this book must have been to edit and copy edit. Like I'm an editor as my day job, and like the person who copy edited this book, who double checked like the timeline and that everything fitted together and made sure that like everything happened in each different day in the correct order at the correct time, and that all the times lined up and that all the things lined up. Like the person who copy edited this book deserves a medal. Anyway, that's a very specific reaction personal to me as a copy editor, but yes, I love this book in many ways. I found it so gripping and so engaging. I thought the characterization was really interesting, and there's quite a lot of interesting things about like how it would be to be kind of possessing someone else's body every day, like how it feels to be in different bodies and also to kind of be slightly in different minds. I will say that I didn't love all of that stuff. Like there's one day where he inhabits the body of a man who's quite large, and there's like quite a lot of quite mean stuff said that I felt was a bit like off, to be honest. I think my other sort of criticism for this book, I suppose, or the other thing I slightly struggled with, was that because of the time loop and because of the sort of weird premise of it, that slightly detaches from the mystery. Like that has to be the main thing in the book, really, more than the sort of mystery itself. And so I do think the mystery worked, but I kind of feel like the sort of suspects and the characters involved in the mystery, like they were slightly diminished by the premise and the time loop. And it's complicated because the thing that makes this book fantastic is the time loop, but also the thing that means it's harder to stick the landing is the time loop. And I felt like the ending didn't necessarily stick the landing in the way I wanted to. But you know, this book is very, very popular and has many, many fans and doesn't need me to love it. I did like it a lot, as I said, but I feel like it wasn't as much a sort of favourite as I was maybe expecting it to be. But yeah, anyway, that's a long ramble. I feel like I'm being very rambly today, but I read a lot of great and interesting books in June. And another great and interesting book I read in June was The Ministry of Time by Kellyanne Bradley, which I loved. This is a really, really weird book that will definitely not be for everyone, but I thought it was great and so fun. When I was reading this, like in the first half of the book, I was like, this has favourite book of the year potential. I think it probably isn't like top favourite book of the year. Well, it's definitely not, because you know there's Glorious Exploits and The Well of Loneliness to compete for that space, but it probably will be in my like top 10 or whatever when I get to the end of the year, because I thought it was fantastic and really, really fun and very much a me book. It is a weird novel about an unnamed narrator who is a civil servant who gets transferred to working for a new ministry in the UK, the Ministry of Time. The idea is that the British government have somehow discovered time travel, and in order to run an experiment and test the impacts of time travel on people, they've taken a few select individuals from the past and brought them into the present. And they've taken them from the past, like at moments where they were about to die, so that their absence isn't going to cause a problem with history. And they brought them to the present to see if they can, like, bring these people into the modern world and integrate them into 21st century life. And this book is set in like the near future, I would say, probably like 5-10 years ahead of where we are now, and there's lots of interesting things in the book about climate change and things like that, which I thought worked quite well. And we are following our unnamed narrator as she works as the bridge, the sort of companion and housemate and guide to a Victorian man who has been brought from the past to the present. If you're expecting like hardcore science fiction, that isn't really what this book is. This book is a speculative rom-com that turns into like an espionage thriller in the final quarter, which I loved and had a lot of great fun with. But I think some people have not enjoyed this book because they were kind of hoping for sort of more time travel stuff and less romance. I don't think this book will be for everyone because of its genre blending like oddity, and I also don't think it'll be for everyone because it's got a very like distinct narrative voice, which I personally loved. And I think my absolute favourite thing in this book was just like seeing modern day people and people from the past interact, because that's just massive fun. You know, there kind of ends up being like a little group of friends. So there's various scenes where like there's dinner parties between someone from 1847, someone from 1916, someone from 1665, and someone from the 21st century. And the way they talk to each other, and like how Kellyanne Bradley has like done all of their dialogue in its historical way, but also sometimes peppered with modern phrases, because of course they're picking up modern phrases. Like I just loved that. It's so fun. And especially as someone who like loves the Victorian period and finds Victorian history fascinating, like just reading lots of conversations between a Victorian and a modern person is super fun. And I feel like they were done really well. And I think also Kellyanne Bradley had a really like good and complicated, nuanced understanding of the Victorian period, of the fact that actually someone from 1847 is very different from someone later on in the Victorian period, and also like lots of the complexities around, you know, Victorian attitudes and things like that. You know, there's a lot of discussion in this book about like racism and prejudice and things like that. The narrator, like Kellyanne Bradley herself, is half Cambodian, and the way she interacts with someone who is from the past and from a point in British history where there was a lot of racism, the way that is handled and the complexities there, I thought were really, really well done. And there's just a lot in this that I really loved. So I really loved this. I would really recommend it. As I said, it's very weird. I don't think it will be for everyone. And I watched like lots of people's reviews on BookTube afterwards, and I know a lot of people have not enjoyed this so much, but personally, I thought this was great. So there we go. I also read 2 rom-coms in June. So one of them was Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young, which is a really fun rom-com about 2 people who meet at a party, have a one-night stand, and then she realizes that she is pregnant, so they sort of come together to be co-parents. And of course, you know, it's a rom-com, maybe they're going to fall in love. I really enjoyed Out on a Limb a lot. I initially picked this up sort of at the end of May for the Spoonies readathon, because it's got disability rep in it. Both of the 2 main characters have limb differences, and I thought the novel does a really good job of both looking at how that does affect their lives a lot, but also how in many ways it doesn't. I thought that was really well done, and the romance was really well done too. And there's a lot of like fun little elements in it. Beau, the love interest, he's very nerdy and likes D&D, which I enjoyed as someone who is nerdy and likes D&D. I probably would have liked even more of that stuff in the book, but it was still quite fun. The one thing I will say is that I feel like the ending was like a little bit too long, but regardless, I still had a really good time with it. And yeah, very fun read. And then the other romance novel I read in June was Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry, which I listened to on audiobook right at the end of the month. I love Emily Henry a lot. She's a real favourite author of mine. I think she writes fantastic novels, and I think she writes the kind of romance novels that I love, in that they have a really great balance of like romance and life stuff. Like the love story is the central plot, but the subplots and the side characters are always like hugely well developed and really, really well drawn in Emily Henry books, which I love. So in Great Big Beautiful Life, we're following Alice, who is a journalist, and she has arrived in this little small town on an island in order to interview a famous celebrity who has been missing for many, many years, but whom she has tracked down. She wants to write this woman's biography, and she realizes when she arrives there that she is in competition with another writer who also wants to write her biography. And then we follow the kind of month-long trial that these two different journalists have with Margaret, the celebrity. Throughout this month, Margaret tells Alice the story of her life, but maybe she's not being as accurate and as truthful as Alice would like. And meanwhile, our two rival journalists are, of course, falling in love. And it's just great. I really, really loved Great Big Beautiful Life. It's so fun. I love the story within a story element. Feels very like a mashup of Emily Henry and Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is great. I really enjoyed the themes within this book, everything about family and fame and writing and grief and loss, and so much more. It's such a great novel. I really love Emily Henry, as I said, and I think she, always strikes that balance really well. Did I want even more of the story within a story? Would I have liked the book to be even longer? Yes, but, you know, it was great. It was great. Then this month I also read, a handful of short stories from this collection. This is Blind Water Pass by Anna Metcalf. So I read this in full, sort of probably a good like 8-9 years ago, and I remembered really loving it, and I wanted to reread a couple of stories from it, partly because I used to have a little in-person book club where we read like a play, a short story and a poetry collection every month, and then we did that for like a year, and then we all got really busy and didn't do it for ages. But we're going to try and start that up again soon. And I thought, oh, it'd be nice to do one of these short stories. So I read like the short stories that I had said back in my whatever wrap up 9 years ago on BookTube were my favourite short stories from the collection. So I read those again. I didn't actually love them as much as I had all those years ago. I found them interesting still, but I didn't like love them as much. One of the 3 stories I did still really like, which is Everything is Aftermath. I still really like that story, and that's the one we're gonna do in our book club, I think. But the other couple of stories I read I didn't love as much as I had before. But yeah, I don't think I have anything more to say about that. And then finally, I read some comics this month. I read this, Bindup. This is X-Men Legacies collection. So this has various X-Men comics in, mostly from the 90s, I think. In fact, I think they're all from 1993, but they're from different, like, X-Men series. Like, some of them are just from X-Men, and some of them are from Uncanny X-Men. So I'm kind of trying to get into comics a bit more at the moment, because I really like superhero cartoons, and used to like superhero films, though Marvel has gone a little bit off the boil lately, but I like superheroes as concepts a lot, and I love the X-Men as a concept, so I have been meaning to pick up some actual X-Men comics rather than just continuing to watch cartoons and films. Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I definitely enjoyed some of the comics in here more than others. Like I said, it's a bind-up and a kind of best of, and that means that there are some comics where I just was missing a lot of context. So there was sort of one run in the middle of this where there were 4 comics that actually all initially ran together and had a through plot throughout them that I really, really enjoyed. But then some of the stuff either side of it, I was just missing a little bit of context and got a bit confused. But overall, I did really enjoy this, and I love the X-Men thematically. If you don't know the sort of concept of the X-Men, the idea is that the X-Men are all mutants, so they are people whose genes are a bit different and therefore they have special powers, but they are hated by society, and there is a lot of anti-mutant movements going on within their world. Society distrusts them because they are different, and obviously that setup has so many parallels to so many things in our world, and the way X-Men as a thing looks at the demonization of difference is just really powerful and really important. So I love the X-Men for that, and it's been really nice to read some actual X-Men comics. Also, the art style is incredible and really cool. Yeah, here's a cool page for you. It looks really cool. I really like it. I am still quite new to comics, so every now and then I'm I haven't learned how to read the dialogue and in the right order, but I'm getting there, and I'm really enjoying going on a little journey with comics. So Yes. Okay, so that's everything that I read in June. Do let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, and let me know what your favourite book of June was. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.